evaluating writers elevating writers of all backgrounds. We have classes and programs for all kinds of writers and literary citizens and open to the public. So please, please check out our website, sign up for the newsletter, The Writer's Grotto, follow us on social, and you'll be able to see this amazing roster of classes and events that go on, many of which are open to the public. So tonight we are talking about the very intense mother-daughter dynamic. And I think every writer has the prototype of this primal relationship because they've had one of their own. You've had a mother relationship, maybe not mother-daughter, but some kind of relationship with mother, depending on your gender. It's a fundamental relationship. And whether it's close and intimate or tense and distant, it's still profound. If you're in the fictive world, imagining and inventing characters, that real biological dynamic remains, and you're writing either aligning with it or contrasting with it or inventing something altogether different. And perhaps in the fictive world, you're fantasizing about what could have been, what kind of relationship could have been there, the one you didn't have. Regardless, I think it's always in conversation with writing, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. In the nonfiction world, I'm a fiction writer. I feel it's even more intense, and we'll hear from Audrey tonight. And I know Ethel also writes essays, so she's in the more nonfiction world as well. How do you write about it and show that complexity, which often includes not only that favorable side of the dynamic, but the shadow or negative aspects? And how do you grapple with that? We'll hear about that tonight. And if your mother is alive, how do you write and without damaging that relationship? So I think this is fascinating and it's terrifying to me, and I haven't touched nonfiction because of it. Some of the other topics we'll talk about tonight, if you're writing nonfiction or essay, how much do you collaborate with your mother? Do you allow her to read drafts? And why not? What's the mother's role in kind of curtailing or shaping the behavior of the daughter to align with societal expectations and the implicit rules and norms and behaviors of femaleness? Whenever I think about that, I always think of Jamaica Kincaid's short story, Girl, which was published in 1978, and the opening line, wash the white clothes on Monday and put them on the stone heap. There's all these instructions of what to do as a girl. And you feel that passing of restraint and constraint and also wisdom from mother to daughter going on in that short story. If it's a focal point of your work, you end up writing about the mother-daughter relationship a lot, how do you avoid repeating the same things? How do you make it dynamic? How do you make it new? And I'm always fascinated about the generational gap between mother and daughter. So I know my mother didn't have the same opportunities that I had. And what kind of in that gap, in that generational gap, what fills up within that gap? Jealousy sometimes, a lot of emotions that you wouldn't necessarily expect. So we can talk about that as well. Toward the end, about 7, we'll open it up for questions. So as you're listening and thinking about writing about the mother-daughter relationship, or if you've done that before, we'd love to hear from you and any questions that come up as we go along the way. So I want to start with Audrey, who is in the nonfiction realm. And again, I said it's pretty terrifying to me. I wanted to ask you, when you're grappling with writing about your mother, and you can talk about what you're doing now, your project that you're focused on, do you collaborate with her? Do you ask her permission? How do you go about it so that you feel free to write what you need to write, have that expansiveness, and yet don't harm or cause injury to that relationship?
Thank you so much for the questions. Yes, it is a bit of a tug of war at times. I will say there are several things that I am currently grappling with. So my mother lives with me now. She just turned 88. And I think that is the first thing I'm grappling with, is that I feel the pressure of time. I feel on the one hand that I want to finish at least the first draft of the book. I think saying I'm going to finish it and find an agent and a publisher and all that, that might be a little bit much, but in an ideal world, yeah, she would see it, on a bookshelf somewhere. That would be my ideal dream. But
And
at
would
age,
she read it? Would she read it before it gets to that stage? Are you allowing that to happen?
so that was the next point that I was going to say is that it's tricky, right? Because for me, another thing I've grappled with is I've published a few poems now, but prose I'm still learning. And so part of the problem is that I'm not sure my craft is good enough to do the story justice as I'd like it to be, and so I am nervous about showing her things. And I have showed her things, and she's very protective. The story is a lot about her youth and growing up in another country, and there's just some things that happen. For example, my older brother was born out of wedlock, so there's things that in her culture and society and in her mind are still totally unacceptable. And she has a hard time talking about some of those things. She grew up in, it was Rangoon, Burma when she was born. So you might know the country now as Myanmar. We don't call it that. We still call it Burma. But there's a lot of geopolitical tensions that the truth of her story would involve. And she's nervous. She doesn't want those things told. So that's another aspect of grappling with it. So I'm always sort of considering like, I want the book to be, I want her to see the finished book, but then parts of me sometimes are just like, you know what, maybe I have to wait till she's gone to tell this thing the way I want to tell it. Um, so there's that, and honestly, she is older. She's 88. So she was born in the late 30s. And the story is really centered around her and my father meeting. So my father was a US Marine, went over there, one of the first Black Americans to stand embassy security guard duty at a US embassy overseas. And so there is a lot of politics, there's a lot of race and class, a lot of issues. And it happened to be right when the Burmese military was starting to overthrow that government. And honestly, there's just sort of a lot of dark things that were happening, a lot of things that folks were doing for survival that she's just not really comfortable talking about. But to get back to your point, I think when I've shown my mother stuff, even happy things, happy memories that I've written that I think, oh, this will make her laugh or smile, she still cries. She is
Hmm.
literally the only person I know she can cry from any emotion. And I say, Mom, this is happy. Why are you crying? And she says, because I'm sad because of how happy I used to be before your dad died, So, um,
Well,
yeah,
well, knowing that there's some things that she's protective of, she wants a certain sphere of privacy around, does it prevent you from writing about them, those events or those incidences, or do you still write about them because it wouldn't be a cohesive whole if you left them out?
I write what I want to write and then I show it to her. And if she's like, no, you can't say that, it'll give people the wrong idea, or, well, the family is going to get surveilled. Like they're going to send spies to watch us. Like, I'm like, Mom, you're 88. Like, I really think it's safe now. But I go back, I do try to write things in a way that she approves of. But in the back of my mind, I'm always pushing. I'm always like, trying to figure out a way, like, can't I just say it this way or that? So it's hard.
It sounds very hard. Ethel, have you grappled with something like that as well in your essays or writing about the mother-daughter relationship?
Yeah, in particular, Audrey, when you said, you're grappling with that idea of should you wait until your mother passes? And both my parents have passed now. They died very close together, and there was definitely a sense, along with the grief and the messiness and all of that loss, there was also a sense in time of freedom that I could write much more freely. And out of that, I wrote a chapbook called Out of Dublin, the city where I was born and raised. And I was able to write about them in a way that felt very honest, that I could not have done were they still alive. For very similar reasons to yourself, just ultimately, I did not want to hurt them. I did not want to add in any way negatively to the wounds that the three of us already had. Um, and I also understood that they didn't have a perspective on what was ultimately my story, they wouldn't have shared that perspective. And it was just that sense of there would be more damage done, I think, that ultimately prevented me. I held back
And
until they passed. And it was definitely cathartic to finally write about that. It kind of comes back to another theme that shows up a lot in my writing, and that is idea of voice, and of being able to just kind of really show yourself in very vulnerable ways, but speaking your truth. So
I think that was my question. What's the impetus? If you know that it could do harm, like you have to, it seems in nonfiction, the pressure is on the truth, and to leave chunks out, you're giving a half story. So to grapple with that, it's like, and to be comfortable with that, like I didn't say it all. So I want to go back to just think about what's the impetus to write about the mother-daughter relationship. And you brought up voice. Is it the need to express it and say it out loud, the dynamic, or
yeah, it is that sense of, well, I had been bottling up so much, even in my fiction, it held me back because, readers, particularly those who know the author, are always reading for how much of this is drawn from experience, how much of this is real autofiction, that type of thing. So I knew those questions would be asked. So whether it was fiction, but particularly with nonfiction, I was always mindful of what I was showing, what I was committing to the page and what was going to stand sort of on the record, if you will. Um, but the impetus for sure was that sense of, yes, being silenced,
yeah.
holding secrets, which are always toxic. And,
Mhm.
those type of secrets will always come out. And I felt, I worked hard enough at my art that it was the right way to kind of expose what was my truth. And stories that I just needed to tell that definitely proved more powerful than me. Something I know we're all going to touch on later on is just the idea of the stories that we tell and the sort of patterns and obsessions, preoccupations that are always threaded throughout our work. And for me, it just keeps coming up, and I resisted it for so long. This another mother, and
Yeah.
inevitably or too often, particularly in my earlier work, the bad mother, that trope. And I resisted it. And when I finally surrendered to it, everything was better, both personally and in my writing, just sort of embracing the idea of, well, this is my story to tell. This is, as you mentioned in the opening, Nina, this is a primal, profound, formative relationship that very much imprinted me, is integral to who I am. It's going to come out in my stories. We always show ourselves in our stories. So it was just an idea of just surrendering to it. And I think I'm at a point now where I'm actually embracing it.
And thank you, Audrey. I think you'd mentioned when we were preparing that you also wanted to, in some way, memorialize your mother for your progeny when and if you have children, like to have gone in detail who she was and how she came to be and how you came to be, so that in the future generation will know. Is that right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And then I also think that, and I'm sure everyone thinks this, whose parents had a happy love story, like it's the greatest love story ever told. And there's some element of uniqueness, I think, that I wanted to capture, because it was unlikely for a Black American man in 1960 to get to Burma and meet the love of his life, right? There was something special about that. So I'm just wanting to chronicle and document the ways that people find each other, even in the most unlikely of circumstances.
That's great. Can we hear a little bit of your work? Can you read?
Sure,
Okay.
I'd be happy to. So the memoir that I'm working on, the working title of it right now is Return to Rangoon, a mother-daughter story. And I'm just going to read a little bit from the prologue, if that's okay.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Where will our next lifetime together begin, lover? My mother whispers this into the stillness of her bedroom, her voice barely stirring the air. At 88, with a pacemaker keeping rhythm for the most generous heart I've ever known. She speaks to my father across the 25 years since his death. The question hangs in the space between heartbeats, between worlds, between lifetimes. We meet in the kitchen. As the bay window takes on the glow of the golden hour, the sunset casts the same golden hue that she says reminds her of sun rays that once painted the streets of Rangoon. With my laptop propped between two overturned copper pots, the screen shows us my brother and his two children waiting in their separate kitchens, ready to cook together across 3 time zones. We've found this new way to gather, to preserve what remains of a family and city that exists now only in memory. My son, she calls to my brother, tell your children about the coconut seller's song. She begins to hum a melody that once wound through the streets of their Rangoon home on Coquine Road every morning. Her hands, trembling slightly, but still sure, measure heaping spoonfuls of our homemade masala for Grandma Dot's chicken curry. Though we're cooking in different cities, Seattle, Frankfurt, Washington, D.C., and Concord, the aromatic steam rising from our pots connects us like invisible threads. The Portuguese have a word for this weight we carry, saudade, a deep melancholia, a longing for places we've never seen, a nostalgia for times we never lived. It runs in our blood alongside the colonial legacy that brought my parents together. When my DNA test results revealed ancestry from Guinea-Bissau, a West African nation once ruled by a Portuguese family who share my mother's maiden name of Pereira, I understood differently how empire had shaped both sides of my heritage. The same forces that drove my father to join the U.S. Marines and escape his tiny hometown in Arkansas during segregation had earlier sent Portuguese sailors to South Asia, where they would become the forefathers to my mother's Anglo-Burmese heritage. Now I watch my mother teach her grandchildren how to combine the ingredients correctly, her voice carrying to them across cyberspace the way it once carried across the kitchen at 103 Coquine Road. We can't return to the Rangoon of her youth unless we discover time travel. The city where she was born, where she grew up, met my father, and began to raise my older brother. That place only exists in memory, replaced now by neon signs and 6-lane highways, where once horse cart rickshaws clip-clopped through golden evenings. But in these weekly cooking sessions, we've learned to create our own kind of return. My mother's question about where she will spend her next lifetime isn't meant for me, but I feel its weight in my bones. I am the daughter of soulmates who defied history to find each other. I am the keeper of recipes that speak of both loss and survival. I am the inheritor of a legacy that spans empires and revolutions. As I help her navigate between stove and sink, matching my pace to her slowing steps, I understand that a return to homeland isn't always about going back to visit a place physically. Sometimes it's about learning to carry home within us, about finding ways to honor what was lost while celebrating what remains.
No, it's
Thank you.
beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Just beautiful. I loved it. Yeah, amazing. You mentioned what's inherited, and we hear a lot of the inheritance, the biological, the colonial, what's been inherited from family. And I want to move to Jenny because I think some of your work is focused on what's inherited via the mother-daughter, or what does the daughter inherit from the mother in terms of essentially social behavior, social etiquette, the policing that often goes on. The mother does this, so behavior aligns with societal expectation, the implicit, morals and rules and how to behave so that you're respected or you become, marriage material or whatever you're being primed for. So I wanted you
Yeah.
to talk about that, just like why that's an interest of yours, and how have you come to terms with it in your writing, and how is it showing up in your writing?
Yeah, I mean, in this particular passage that I'm going to share, it's from my novel, Here's a Game We Could Play. And it's actually about how mothers and daughters deal with body issues and weight. And so, the fact that there's a lot of pressure on mothers to kind of make sure your daughter is a certain weight. And at the same time, there can be feelings among the daughter about the mother if the mother doesn't like her weight. In this particular story, it's about a young girl named Claudia, and she is living in a small town in Pennsylvania, and she is she's trying to sort of learn how to break free of the town and move away, but it's very difficult for her. And part of that is her connection with her mother. And I think that, our mothers do kind of, for good sometimes and for bad other times, keep us like rooted in a place, and we can sometimes like feel guilty if we're going to leave. We can feel guilty for being different. I mean, feel guilt. She's bisexual. Feel guilty for, our sexuality or whatever. It's the mother's we're living in patriarchy, but the mother's job is kind of to enforce it in a lot of ways. It's sort of like the mother is the one who is carrying on the traditions, and she oftentimes more than the father. Fathers can also, of course, enforce this too, but she might enforce it more through shame and guilt, not through so much like you can't do that, or this is no way can you marry that person, no way can you have that job or whatever, but more just through like, oh well, you wouldn't be a good woman if you did that, or you oh that would be gosh, I'd be so ashamed of you if that happened, or you just know, even without them saying what they're going to be ashamed of when you
Yeah.
do it. And
Yeah, I
so,
mean, often it's what they're modeling, even if they're not aware that they're modeling certain behavior. I remember my mother, she would never go out without having makeup on. So there's an implicit message that you're not presentable unless you dress up, and you can't go out we weren't allowed to wear pants to school, jeans, that's not presentable. So there were these strange kind of messages like, okay, that means that there must be a lot of work that must be done to become, acceptable and presentable, that as you are, it is not suitable for society. And I know in my book, The Translator, there's a mother-daughter relationship, and the mother sees great talent in the daughter as a person that will easily pick up languages. So the mother is a Japanese translator. She translates Japanese literature into English, but her daughter can just hear a language and quickly adopt it and make it her own. It's like, you should come into this field. And essentially the daughter becomes an extension of the mother, but the daughter doesn't want that. So another kind of policing, like, I see you as a reflection of me, and I see that this is the required path. And the daughter's saying, no, this is not my path. So the policing can happen, and not just like, becoming marriage material, but this is what you should do with your life, and these are your strengths, and your weaknesses are these, and therefore, given the logical assumption of a life, you should do what you're best at, you should do this. And yet that's all that pressure and weight on the daughter, right? I don't know. Ethel, you want to chime in on this?
Just how deeply that resonates, just that idea of being placed and prescribed roles. And I think that's something, the older I get, and I'm the mother of two daughters, that I just become more and more awake to that, and more resistant of it. I still feel like I'm growing into who I really am, because it wasn't until quite late in my own life that I even started to question, well, who am I and what do I want? And realizing how very fiercely, I was told who to be and how to be. And, again, I think so much of it has to do with culture, born in Irish, in Ireland, staunchly Catholic, prescribed roles for women, very much so traditional. But it's obviously it's a very pervasive, ongoing problem, and sort of a nod to Women's History Month. And that is our history, that is our legacy. And that is something, the oppression that we continue to resist against, horribly so, sort of unbelievably so, even in present day. It's staggering where we are.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Have you, in your writing, Jenny, have you seen this theme emerge not only in your novel, but in other work? Is it something that you return to as you write?
Yeah, I'm working on another book that has a lot of, semi-autobiographical material in it. And I think, to me, like, unlike Ethel, I was kind of like more like the black sheep in my family. I don't know if you were or not, but I mean, I sort of didn't like to play the games very early on. But, there was always, some pushback against that, and so I think I had the I had the experience. I loved my mother. I was very close to my mother, but I had the experience of being very close to my mother, but also just being very different from her. And so that was always kind of uh, um, like you, Ethel, my parents are both passed away. And I too felt like, I'm deeply sad. But as far as writing, yes, you don't have to worry about the opinions of your parents at some point. And yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Do you want to read
Yeah. So this
your
is
work? Okay.
this is a section. And so Claudia, the main character, is like coming home to her mother, and her mother is, well, you'll see that it's just sort of, Claudia's in her 20s. I let myself into the house with my key. Mom is sitting on the white couch. The white couch is her one symbol that she is not a full-time mother anymore. She always wanted a white couch and bought it after I had grown up. Still, the white couch is getting a little gray. There's a bag of open potato chips at her feet. Bickles. It seems like she's been crying. Hey, Mom, what's wrong? I sit beside her and she looks at me blankly. I'm too fat, she says. She tries to stop crying, but tears are still running down her wrinkled but pretty face. I put my arm around her. She feels nice. And I remember as a kid loving her big lap. Oh no, Mom, it's okay. Sometimes I feel a little like I'm propping my mother up. And if I really left, she would fall over. I am, she says. I'm disgusting. She's wearing polyester pants and a green and blue sweater. She has short, curly black hair that is graying, and she could lose maybe 50 pounds, but she still has a pretty face and bright blue eyes that I envy. She looks fat, but nice. I think how her weight doesn't matter. In no way should it make her feel like this. It's okay, I say. You look good to me. She looks the same way she has for 20 years. I don't really think anything is going to change. Don't say that. I just can't do anything about it. I know, I say. I'm fat too. I am a little overweight. In good moments, I think of my figure as generous. If she hates herself, then do I have to hate myself too? No, you're not, she says. You're pretty. Pretty fat, I say, thinking pretty is not the opposite of fat. Did something happen? Usually there's a trigger with Mom. Oh, she sighs. Well, yes. I've been on a diet for a month and I gained a pound. I gained a pound on my diet. I went on with Ruth Geyer down the block, and Ruth has lost 12 pounds. I really tried in the beginning, but I've been cheating. She's my diet buddy, and I have to call her and tell her my progress. She wants to talk all the time so she can gloat. My mother has moved from sad to angry. The phone just rang. I knew it was her, so I didn't even answer. Probably lost another pound. The chips, I say. I can't help smiling because Bickle's her favorite. At least she didn't fall off the wagon for Pringles. Depression, she says, but I've been mostly good. It's hard. I want to make weight go away. I want my mom to not worry about something so superficial, but I can't. The TV is on in the kitchen and it gets loud as a commercial for crackers comes on. People so goddamn excited about a piece of baked flour. Of course, this is what we have to swim in, all of it, all of the time. She sighs and looks around. I'm sick of it, she says. Sick and tired of being fat and sick of trying. Well, nobody cares, I say, and you're not that fat. Outside our picture window, the mailman walks by. I notice him and know the one thing that can distract my mother from being fat is the mail. Mail's here, I say.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So was that hard to write? I mean, is
Yeah,
it autofiction or are you just making this up or where are we in the realm of reality?
it's fiction, but the character is a lot like my mother. I mean, my mother and I both have been overweight, and yeah, so it was a lot. The character is in a lot of ways similar to my mother, and I do think that there is this terrible, sadness that women can share about body image, and also just this, idea that it turns into self-hatred,
Yeah.
So I mean, that passage is, yeah, it's kind of about potato chips, but it's really about self-hate. And so it's kind of like it it gets people, that kind of hatred. When you see your mother having a hatred about their body, you learn to hate your own body. And even if you don't, culture's still going to teach you it. So, it's kind of a hard.
Well, you had that one line, that question, if she hates herself, am I supposed to hate myself? Am I supposed to be learning this? And
Yeah.
anything that's posed as a question introduces doubt. The character Claudia walked in, she didn't have that until this interaction. So it was interesting to watch. First, she felt, mom was a mess crying and she was in control and she was trying to calm her down. But then that question enters and it's like the inner world becomes wobbly for Claudia.
Yeah, right. You try to stay sort of stronger above it, but you end up getting sucked into it. It's easy to get sucked into that kind of feeling. Yeah.
Yeah, you captured that really well. Just that dynamic and that modeling that happens, even if the mother isn't even aware she's doing that, but something gets jarred inside. My mother feels this way. Am I supposed to feel this way? Because I look like this? Really
Yeah.
beautiful, really touching and beautiful. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful reading and heartfelt. So Ethel, we've talked and you find the mother-daughter relationship, and you mentioned here that it's a consistent theme in your fiction. It keeps coming up in the essays and the novels that you're writing. What is captivating to you? Is there a sense that you're trying to work something out or re-experiencing something or
Yeah, I think it's complicated. There are many layers to it. I think initially it was me sort of just processing, like telling myself the story just felt very important. And I mentioned earlier how I didn't always feel like I had control of that. Like I might intend to write about X, but invariably the mother-daughter dynamic would come through on the page. And certainly my earlier work, it was very much drawn from my own experiences. And there was a sense of sort of working through that. I think some of my dilemma as a young child, my mother suffered psychosis and was untreated for many years. So I think one of my burning questions is a very young girl was, is my mother mad or is she bad? And so I think it was exploring that in my stories and not feeling like it was my mother and I, but maybe through story, if I could arrive at a sense of character and know their sort of full depth and breadth, that there would be something satisfying about that. I mean, I'm fascinated by people and all relationships. And so it's just this idea of how do we work? And when my mother was at the worst of her illness, she was abusive, verbally and physically, and sort of that also imprinted on me a real horror, but also a real burning curiosity about our capacity for cruelty,
Yeah.
especially in such a sacred relationship. The idea. And I remember once just, screaming at my mother, you're my mother, you're not supposed to do this.
Mm.
So it's just the real shattering of, how we're told, the mother-daughter dynamic should be, and how for me it was such a different reality, and for so many of us, in a myriad of ways. Um, so yeah, I was reckoning with that. And then something that Audrey touched on in her reading, after my parents passed, I thought that was sort of the end of the story. And you mentioned at the outset, Nina, this idea of we also mourn the relationship that never was. And so when my parents passed, I thought, well, that's it. Any hopes I had for further healing, for some honesty, among us is gone. And I sort of felt like the story ended. But what's happened in the years since is I've started speaking to my parents, just like Audrey, your mom speaks to your dad. And I found that incredibly powerful and healing. And I think that was born out of my speaking to my characters. As writers, particularly fiction writers, we're often asking questions of our characters, trying to get to know who they are, etc., and their motivations. Well, why did you do that? And I found that so rich in terms of craft and storytelling. I sort of just automatically, organically started doing it with my parents, and it's been very healing. And I feel like the relationship with them is ongoing and evolving. And my relationship with mother-daughter stories in my writing is evolving. And in my latest novel, it was very nice for me that, yes, there is a thread of mother loss, but it's not the central thread for my protagonist. And I think something I've been, again, sort of unconsciously exploring, but probably speaks to where I am in my own journey, is using my imagination to look at, richer, healthier, more loving mother-daughter relationships, and that sense of mourning the loss of love.
Yeah.
Me losing my parents, in particular my mother, was a sense of mourning much more than just love. And so I really enjoy the moments in the story, and not all of them ended up in the book, where my main character, Esther, connects with her mother, again, through memory. And it's that idea of reclaiming, right? I'm trying to reclaim, because there was a lot of love between my mother and I. It was just horribly messy. And so it is a sense of just kind of reclaiming and reframing and I've reached a point in my life where I believe, true love is sort of knowing the flaws and accepting the flaws, acknowledging them, but loving anyway, and loving despite, and loving with forgiveness. So that's coming through in my fiction, and I'm enjoying that.
It feels much more spacious that way. Like,
Yeah, exactly. And just sort of opening up. And I think, no matter how, and this may not land well with everybody, but, just I think no matter the relationship, there is still something sacred about it.
yeah.
We are born of our mothers. And so just kind of trying to channel that, and to be a better mother to myself, that the loss of mothering, not getting that, learning how to give that to myself has been a great gift too.
It makes me wonder, Audrey, you teach, I think if I hear this correctly, like writing as a healing process.
Poetry
Poetry.
is healing.
Does
Yes.
any of this that Ethel's talking about resonate for you, hearing this? Like actually entering and imagining and reimagining and
Yes. So it's really interesting that you say that. So the imaginal, that sort of liminal space that comes through, whether it's in poetry or dreams, that symbolism, we very much, that's, yes, absolutely resonates. And the way I think about it is like the meaning that you make that comes through, whether it's through in a subconsciously in a dream or consciously through poetry. I sort of think of dreams and poetry as inverses of each other now. Yeah, absolutely. And so I love to hear you say that, Ethel, that you're able to imagine, you make up your own imaginal, and you're able to heal by having this conversation with your parents. So I love that.
Yeah, I really, the way you talk about it, where it began, essentially close to autobiographical when you were writing early, and now it just feels more, just like the container got bigger.
Yeah.
So there's not just such a fine focus on that mother-daughter relationship, but there's forgiveness or room for the flaws because we're all flawed. And I remember one therapist said as one prompt, like, write a letter from your mother to you. So essentially become your mother, and what she went through there were 4 daughters in the family, what she went through to raise 4 girls, that kind of thing. And that was just such an imaginative, because I'd been stuck so tight to one narrative for me, like this is how I see it. But in fiction, you have that room, and then you've grown as a writer, just that you said, you go richer, deeper, the depth and breadth. I feel that as you talk, that the writing has gotten richer and deeper too.
Thank you.
Do you want to read something from your book?
Yeah. With a short scene. I don't think you need any context other than there's some reference to a character, Simon, who is our protagonist, Esther's husband. The piano tune from an old TV commercial for Miracle-Gro filled Esther's head. The ad's depressed, befuddled character couldn't figure out how to save his houseplant. And at the end of the ad, there was a caption next to the product's logo that read, "It's no secret." She wasn't sure anything could revive this plant. That day at the garden center weeks back, Simon had said this would happen. No one in the family could claim green thumbs. But she'd read that plants make all sorts of positive differences to a home, and she insisted on acquiring one. Lydia Greasley recommended the money tree. It's practically invincible. Simon said to Esther, "Even you can't kill it." The supposed joke catapulted her back to Mom, collapsed at the bottom of the garage stairs. Dad had insisted Mom died instantly and didn't suffer, but that night Esther overheard mourners speculating over how long Mom might have lain alone on the cold, hard concrete, calling for help while her brain bled out. Esther had never admitted to anyone that she hadn't found Mom immediately after returning home from school. She entered the house that afternoon and dropped her backpack in the hallway, next to the mess of shoes surrounding the coat rack. She called out to Mom and didn't think much of the responding silence. She preheated the oven, removed the ham and pineapple pizza from the freezer, and placed it on the middle rack. Minutes later, tendrils rising from the splotches of burnt cheese on the bottom of the oven set off the smoke alarm. She waved a tea towel under the alarm to stop its piercing wail. She watched TV in the living room, scarfing down a cold can of cola and almost the entire pizza. She picked the cubes of pineapple from the last slice and pushed them into her mouth all at once. Tart, sweet juice spilled over her tongue and her taste buds fizzed. A good hour passed while she remained oblivious to the horror that lay below her in the garage. Ever after, she would wonder how she hadn't sensed anything ominous, how she hadn't known Mom was in fatal peril. She at last entered the garage to get the mail, hopeful of a letter from her school pen pal in Guadalajara. At the top of the stairs, she flipped on the light and spotted Mom on the ground. She rushed down the steps and dropped to her knees. Mom's face felt warm, and she looked like she was only in a deep sleep. Esther had never before checked someone's pulse or breathing. She couldn't tell if she was doing it wrong or if there was, in fact, no life current. She also didn't know CPR, but worked on Mom's chest anyway. What was that song you were supposed to pump your hands in time to? She couldn't remember. She kept working Mom's chest to the beat of "Wake up, wake up, wake up." She abandoned her efforts, terrified she was wasting precious time, and raced back upstairs to call 911. Throughout, she felt like a spirit hovering above the house, watching everything play out far below her. She returned to Mom's side, crying and pleading, saying no, saying please, saying Mom, Mom, Mom. It wouldn't be until hours later, while Dad was on the phone to the funeral director, that she would start to wonder if Mom was still alive when she'd returned home from school, and while she delayed upstairs, watching TV on loud while stuffing herself. Since then, even the sight of pineapple made her gag. She similarly avoided thoughts for setting off the smoke alarm and how its beseeching blast and her thudding footsteps might have been the last sounds Mom heard.
Beautiful, amazing. So I just listening, I feel her isolation, like there's no greeting when she comes home, but she's not used to a greeting. So it's okay. It feels normal. So I feel that alienation or isolation within the home, but you balance it so well with that she is, emotionally affected by her mom at the base of the stairs. Like this, there was something meaningful there. So you talked about as you've continued to write this, this depth and this richness and the breadth. And I feel like that whole scene contains both, just the isolation and the connection. So just really amazingly done. But yeah, and how much the lingering questions, what if she'd noticed, was she still alive? Just all the what ifs you go through. If I'd just gone downstairs. So that is that feels like a haunting as well. And I think I come back to this mother-daughter, it's a haunting, this mother relationship, no matter what it was.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I feel you've set that up really well. Just all the what ifs. What if she'd been a different way? What if you've gone downstairs, or what if the character's gone downstairs, on and on. So beautiful.
It was only while I was reading too that I was struck with Jenny's reading and Jenny, what you shared, and your sort of telling of the mother-daughter dynamic, what comes up. And just as I was reading, just there's self-hatred there around food. Like her memory is very much tied to this idea that I was sort of scarfing down this food, completely oblivious, to my mother's death. And just how that tied back into everything that you said, and that memory is a wound, and there at the forefront of it is food.
Yeah, that was so beautiful. I love the way that you went into all the details of all the food that she was eating, and it very much seemed like a young person just uh, doing their thing. But then yeah, the guilt when she looks back on it, like if I hadn't done all those things, if I had somehow been more attentive.
Tied to food, which again, my mother, that I inherited that too. My mother had issues with food and food addiction and body image and all of that. And yeah, again, so many of us can trace that right through our line.
But there's the figurative implications of food and needing to feel full because
Absolutely, yes,
right,
and nourishment and sustenance and all of
right.
that.
That's
Yeah.
not getting satisfied in any other way.
Yeah, yeah.
So that really works well too as an image coming in. So in my recent book, In This Ravishing World, I have a 70-year-old mother, Eleanor, who's spent her whole life as an environmental economist and is in deep despair about where the world is ecologically now, that everything is so devastating. And her daughter Ava ended up as a scientist. She's busy trying to develop bacteria that will eat plastic, which scientists are busy doing. And Eleanor's a little bit disapproving of it because it's like, what, you're creating more technology to solve the technological problem. It just seems like a roundabout. And then the next thing will happen and you need more technology to solve the problem. But what I was really interested in, and I am interested in, is, as I noted earlier, is one, the generational gap in what previous generations of women had to endure and the limitations and opportunities. Eleanor was was trailblazer being in this world as an environmental economist in the book. She's she made up this profession essentially, because back in the days, nobody was an environmental economist. So she combined in my environmental studies and science with economics. And she was like one of two women doing this in the world. So I think I invented, we've talked about how you can use fiction to invent a mother, like a mother you wanted, just a trailblazer, someone out there shaking up the world kind of thing. So here she is. And then I'm also interested, my mom has since passed, but my dad's still alive, but this role reversal that happens, and you're probably having it happen, Audrey, where you're the caretaker. My father's 89 now. It's like, did you eat today? Did you get up and move? So a complete role reversal that happens, and it, just a responsibility and, a filial obligation and love too. Like, just you've got to keep moving. So I'm interested in that. So I'm going to read just a little bit, and then we can talk further and then open for questions. Eleanor has just received notice that she's a winner of the Goldman Environmental Prize, which we have in real life. And she doesn't really want it, given what she knows about what's happened to the environment and all the work she's done. And it doesn't seem like any of it paid off. And when I read and talk to different groups, a lot of women who were in the reproductive rights movement feel the same way in this present time, that all the work they did for Roe versus Wade, it's gone. And now where are we? But the same thing in the environmental movement. And also I've heard from women that were against nuclear weapons, and they feel like, well, we're like where we are. They're everywhere. We're still perched on annihilation. So Eleanor is thinking, I don't want this award. And this is Ava kind of schooling her. You're not thinking straight, Ava said flatly. It's probably true, her sluggish thoughts made so by despair. Did she even make coffee yet? Eat anything? Eleanor is aware of her heart beating fast like a trapped, anxious animal clawing to escape. Her daughter lately seems to view Eleanor as not so quick. Ava's concerned about Eleanor traveling to Vietnam last summer. That pointed question, are you sure you can handle such a long flight? Followed by a flurry of other nervous inquiries. Where will you stay? You're going alone? Is that wise? As if Eleanor had never flown before. As if she'd never flown for her work to Vietnam or Cambodia, Indonesia, Japan, Botswana, or South Africa alone. As if all of that has vanished. Eleanor gets up and begins to walk the halls of her house with Blue, her loyal black lab, tapping the floorboards behind her, passing through the threshold of her study, back down the hall to the sunlit living room, the kitchen, and the front entrance. Their house, hers and Arthur's, where they spent their long marriage. She stops and looks out the window. The light shines brightly on the rhododendron leaves, and an empty plastic cup sits in the gutter. It's true, some have a wonderful dream that they never accomplish. But see, says Eleanor, if I accept it, I'll have to give a speech. It's usually the way these things work, says Ava, but I don't have anything to say, at least nothing anyone wants to hear. There are days she can barely speak, her voice wheezy and faint. Where did she go wrong? What approach should she have taken? How come her work has come to nothing? Her throat tightens, clampens down her next words because she refuses, a rule she gave herself long ago, not to burden her children with their inner angst, her vulnerabilities and fears. Lately, the slightest thing, the squawk of a scrub jay with the faint pink of its beak, the air all over Fort Funston, heavy with the sea's brine and seaweed. The morning glories, the lovely light in their center like a slow secret, makes her weepy, a mix of deep pleasure and deep sorrow. Somehow, to receive this prize now feels like a cruel joke, absurd. The letter seems to have loosened something inside because before she can stop herself, she says, I feel like a failure. Oh, Mom, says Ava. Eleanor can hear the puzzlement and exasperation and hint of concern in her daughter's voice. Eleanor steadies her voice. I'll be fine. Stop there. So just this dynamic.
Wonderful. Nina, can I ask you, so you said you created that mother sort of as a as an ideal of a mother that you might like to have, and yet she is sort of judgmental of the daughter, or not totally supportive of her. What How does that play into your ideal that you created her as sort of an ideal?
Well, I think the ideal of an intellectual partner. So they can both talk environmental science to the day is over. They can go on and on. They both know all the facts and what's happening. They can cite CO2 levels and what's happening in Antarctica. So I think I keep creating women like that are curious and out there, expanding their horizon. But I do think, and creating kind of these surrogate fictive mothers has had a healing effect. Like, well, this is what it would be, still a fraught relationship because there'd be arguments and like, I don't agree with what you're doing, and they're forthcoming and there's no passive aggressiveness, right? She just comes out and says, you're kind of wasting your time. Why don't we just go plant trees? Just instead of work on bacteria. So she ends up having to think about, maybe I need synthetic bacteria because they're not eating fast enough. It's like, oh, come on, it just goes on and on. So, but that's every relationship, there's no ideal, right? The ideal is that, for me, the ideal is that it's rich and complicating and can hold a lot. There are not subjects that are off limits. Like, you cannot talk about this because you'll make me upset, or, that kind of relationship. So I think Eleanor and Ava have that kind of relationship for the most part.
So it's a deep intellectual relationship with a lot of back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah, and arguing, but they both have voices.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's an interesting dynamic for me, that a woman who can speak her mind and speak, and have another woman that can speak her mind, and the whole relationship can survive such an encounter.
Nice.
Versus like, oh, that's such a good idea. And that's the end of the discussion. Right? You've had those conversations. So my female characters tend to be kind of feisty intellectually and want to get into it. So.
I was really struck by the line, Nina, where Eleanor says, I have nothing to say, at least nothing that anyone wants to hear. And that really resonated. And I immediately thought, well, nothing the patriarchy wants to hear, right?
Yeah.
Like, so often as women, we have that sense of, speaking up will come at such personal cost. And again, my story is sort of around abuse. There's just that sense of people don't want to hear it. People, they sort of like been there, done that, overuse, and it's like, well, really? Because it's still happening and it's getting worse. And
Yeah.
it's just sort of extraordinary to me how the various ways that we're shut down. And it is that sense of to speak up takes so much courage and strength. And again,
I do think that, that it isn't a fantasy that to speak up is benign. It can be very dangerous. If you go against the contemporary accepted paradigms, it can be very dangerous. So I don't think that, and biologically, women for the most part are weaker. So it's like, there is the body itself that is in a compromise, the female body in a compromised position physically. It just is. And, it's too bad that often, things come down to brute force. We're seeing that a lot lately, but that's something to consider as a female. It's like, is this the right time to raise my voice to this, huge man in front of me?
I mean, true, women and all vulnerable groups. Again, Audrey, the excerpt that you read, or when you spoke about your mom voicing fear even now, that, you cannot speak to that, like the sense that she still feels persecution, and a sense of surveillance, that to her would still be dangerous for you to share those stories, and for her voice to speak up through you. That just really struck me.
I don't think until now we've been immersed in that kind of political atmosphere. at least in America. Like politics is now becoming a part of everyone's life. And we've had kind of the naive bubble we've been in. But Audrey, when you brought up your mother's concern of, that it might bring political trouble to raise these questions, I don't know if it's all historical. If it
Mhm.
now it's safe to do it. I don't know.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. We have a question from Tracy. Thanks so much. And we're open to questions. What are the ways, and this is great, what are the ways in which daughters bring expectations to and confine their mothers from being greater than that one role? And I know that as writers, some of us have children, and grappling with the artist role and the mother role that are often in contradicting, and you cannot serve both. So what are the daughter imposing on mother and putting restraints and confinement? Any thoughts about that?
I think
I
for
didn't have a
me,
daughter. I was sort of glad that I didn't have a daughter because I always think like that I fear the judgment of women. And I mean I fear the judgment of women about my own writing too. I mean you're talking about like political issues, but I also fear like that women will judge my work as, not being feminist enough or, not being being too sexual, things like that. So yeah, I fear that judgment. And I think, when I had a child, I had to a degree a fear of like, oh, will this child become someone who looks at me and yeah, tries to I hear other mothers saying like, yeah, oh, my daughter doesn't want me to wear makeup. And I was like, what? Why? Why do they care? And B, like, why do they have a say? Like my, like, I feel like, well, it's better to have a son and they're just oblivious to like what you do with your face. Ethel, how about you? Have your daughters like tried to police you?
um, I I think, as a parent, inevitably there's going to be a sense that we're getting it wrong, and I think we sort of give that message to ourselves. But yeah, there's inevitably, again, in every relationship, there's going to be conflict. Um, and it's probably one of the most challenging roles of my life.
Um,
But thankfully the rewards are all also there. And it is just interesting, to sort of grow up and, well, I'm never going to do this to my kids and I'm never going to be like that. And, I look in the mirror now and I see my dad and I say certain things and, I can hear echoes of my parents for sure. And I'm constantly comparing, how I was treated as a daughter and how I feel I'm treating my children, as my daughter. So it's ever present. And it's positive and negative. I think certainly when they were younger, for me, it just helped me have much more empathy for my own parents, and in particular
yeah.
my mother. And you touched on that, Nina, like, and to
Mm,
just really have a much better understanding of how difficult the role is. And I
yeah.
don't have anything close to the challenges that my mother had. So yeah, and again, like writing in all areas of my life, including being a mother, I'm just always trying to do my best and do better.
Yeah, I think, the daughter, having been a daughter, just and looking at my mom, you're naive. You haven't had enough life experience to possibly know what it is to be a mother and all the sense of sacrifice that I know she had four daughters, just how much she had to give up. It's only until I reached that certain maturity and had at least one child and then two, like my gosh, with two, a tremendous amount of sacrifice and learning. I mean, to me, it's one of the most sacred acts because the self has to step aside so often. Then you're putting their needs and their desires and their well-being first. I mean, in religious practice, right? It's like be of service over and over. It's like, well, I feel that this is what makes it sacred, is that over and over, I am of service every day. I mean, so But at, 12 or 13 years old, I was in a bubble. I didn't possibly know what kind of expectations I was putting on my mom, and being resentful, and also not seeing what she was giving up to have that many children.
I think a lot of contemporary fiction writers, though, I mean, I'm thinking of books like All Fours and like Night Bitch, like that they're talking about, motherhood and in a way that is more like you can still, you can still retain yourself. You can still, be vital. Like, yeah, maybe there's a part of you. I mean, and obviously, Nina, you wrote all these books. You weren't totally being of service all the time. You were still maintaining your creative core. So like I think that a lot of contemporary writers are asking that question of, how do you both be a mother but not give too much up. And of course society wants us as mothers to give everything, like that's the ideal of the mother. Give it all, baby, and I think that, how do you maintain the creativity and hold back in a way is a big
The way, yeah, the way I came to terms with it is that I am a better person when I create. I mean, I think any writer that has longevity, this is a calling. And if you deny the calling, you're very depressed and sad. So I would save my money and hire a babysitter. I remember when they were little, I had 3 hours. I'd hire a babysitter and they'd go to the park, and that was the time. Like, you've got to do something. And, what better deadline? My God, it's just like create something. And I would, even if I never used it, but I was a better person because I honored the calling, and some part of me was fed in a very deep way. So you're right. I mean, I maintained a practice throughout, even when they were, you know, babies, essentially. So yeah. Any other questions out in the audience? Can we? So is there a book anyone that feels like on this topic that hasn't been explored, that, in some way, I haven't read All Fours, but in some way she came along and put a different spin on everything with her, Miranda July did. Is there a book that, you're thinking about, like, or an essay that you're thinking, I really want to write this next about this topic?
um Well, I'm working on a novel that also is a lot about the theme of motherhood. And it's about a woman who has a child with an alien, extraterrestrial, and the child is taken away from her. And so a lot of it is about that loss and sort of like how do you mother, some I guess mothering is a big theme in my writing when I think about it. How do you mother that somebody that you don't understand, or that is living in a world that is like totally different from your own? And in some ways we all have to face that. Like,
Yeah.
I don't understand, my son is 17. I don't understand the world that he's living in. And we all have to kind of learn to, how do we go about against those history and our sense of the world versus our children's sense of the world. But in this case, it's a lot about loss, and that the child is taken from her, and she
That's
can't.
great. That sounds wonderful. And really, intensified because you've used an alien just to put a real, not hyperbolic, but a kind of an extreme situation to make more emotion. I think, Ethel, you addressed it, but I want to come back to, because this has been a recurring theme, how do you not repeat yourself? Is it an intentional thing? Or do you really care about that? I see writers all the time, like, that's what they write about. That's what they write about over and over.
Yeah, it took me a while to arrive at that place in my writing, but I am very much there, that I sort of now have a sense of trust, of what comes up, and it gets, yeah, you know, the goal is always to just tell the best story I can. And you know, through practice, I now know if a character shows up, I trust that. Like gone are the days when I'd sort of have a character come on and I'd spend some time with them and then dispatch them off like, oh, I took a wrong turn here in the story kind of thing. So yeah, I've accepted that there will definitely be repetition in my work. I'm not at the point where I feel I'm telling the same story over and over again, but you know, the threads definitely keep reappearing, and I'm okay with that as long as I'm sort of being honest with the work and just holding myself accountable that it's that I've seen the evolution, and I definitely have. So that feels valuable to me. I'm really struck by what Jenny said, that idea of reversing it. I'm not sure I've ever done that in my work. And now I'm sort of like, oh, maybe that's another angle, that idea of looking at the dynamic, because my work is so much about mother loss. Well, what if, you know, the idea of a mother grieving the loss of a child, and again, that could be in myriad of ways. So that's really interesting to me, to sort of reverse the perspective of the dynamic.
What you said, Ethel, about your primary question earlier, like, is my mother mad or is my mother bad? That really struck me because I teach writing a lot, and there's a lot of people, a lot of women who are writing about their mothers, writing memoirs or writing fiction, and about mothers who struggle with mental illness, you know, in so many different ways. And I think that there is, you know, that there is a lot of interesting writing coming out about that right now, because it's sort of like, how do we deal with the fact that, you know, maybe our mother did not have, you know, the same level of care that we might get, maybe that there's not the same understanding of mental illness, and also like essentially like the, you know, the sort of role of women, like this conscriptive and limited role, is in itself kind of a mental illness. You know, it is a limiting factor. And so how do we take all that into consideration when we're like thinking about like, you know, what our mothers should have, could have, you know, done? And I think that's like a deep topic and very soul searching for a lot of writers, because yeah, there's both the love and the understanding, and then yet the horrific things that, you know, mothers do to their daughters often.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely that idea of her not getting, you know, the healthcare that she needed and deserved. I'm very mindful of that, and how I have so much more opportunities available to me in that regard. But, you know, living in America right now, like healthcare is abominable. You know, it's just, it should be a human right, and it's not. And I do contribute, you know, a lot of the medical field failed my mother, undoubtedly. And again, it was just the idea of, you know, sort of, you know, you'll be fine, you know, kind of stick to your traditional role. And she was just diagnosed way too late and left to suffer for way too long. So I am very mindful of that. Yeah.
Well, I think we've reached the end. What a great conversation and a beautiful reading, just really moving. It is, the readings reinforce how profound the relationship is, because just hearing it on the page and the care and concern and the attention, just amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. I loved hearing everyone read.
Yeah, this was really great. Thank you so much, Nina, for moderating. Really, really appreciate it. I'm so glad I got to meet you, Audrey,
Yes, you too.
and hear your work. That really was beautiful. I'm very much looking forward to reading your entire memoir.
Thank you. Same to you. Same to everyone. Thank you, Lori, and the library.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming tonight. This was a very wonderful conversation. I really appreciated everything that you guys have shared. Just some beautiful writing and great chat and great thoughts. I do want to remind everyone that next month we have Grotto Night will be on April 29th. And I'll post that link in the chat again if you want to register. And then I did want to I did want to let everyone know that Audrey will be back with us on April 19th for Gabrielle Korn in conversation with Audrey T. Williams, talking about our March, April on the same page pick. That'll be here live at the main library in the Corrette Auditorium. She's got the book right there. Great. Thanks, Audrey. And so I want to thank our audience for joining us, and I want to thank all of our wonderful panelists, and I hope everyone has a very good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.